welcome back to Repat Stories, where we travel the world through the stories of others. Today we have Dr. Damien King with us. He's a world-class economist and the director of CAPRI, and he's going to tell us more about that and his time coming back to Jamaica from Canada and the US. So, Dr. King, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me here.
All right, so our show takes a format of home and then away out and then home again, as you know. And so just tell us about growing up in Jamaica.
You know, I consider myself fortunate in many respects, and one of them is my experience growing up in Jamaica. So my family lived near the foot of Red Hills, in what is really now Meadowbrook to some extent. And when we were there in the 60s, in the early 60s, the place was not very, very well developed. And so we were one of the few houses on our street, one of I think only 3 houses. There was a lot of empty land and a lot of kids. And we were able to roam and explore and, build confidence. We made our own slingshots and did the stupid and dangerous things that little boys did. And so it was a kind of a bucolic and affirming and confidence building experience.
And you said that early on, your parents, that school was your get out of jail free card. So if you had something to do, if you had homework, you could kind of get away from doing it by doing some work. Tell us about that.
We always got the impression, without it being communicated explicitly, that education was important. And they did this not by saying, make sure you do your homework, or, education is the key to success. Essentially, just space was created for doing homework and schoolwork. And once you were doing that, then you wouldn't be disturbed. So it was communicated in a subtle but effective way.
Okay. And then my mind was blown when you told me this, because I know theoretically there were young children in Jamaica at the time of Jamaica independence, but you say you remember being in prep school at that time. Tell us about that time.
I remember being in prep school on Glenmore Road in Franklin Town at Independence, and when we got to school, they gave us all a little paper flags, on a little stick, so that we could, we were told to sing the national anthem, the new national anthem, and we waved our little flags. And so, it's nice to have an actual memory of the Day of Independence.
Okay, so tell me more about school. So that was prep school, and then you went to high school at...
Then I went to high school at Campion College.
And you said you weren't... we know now you have a PhD, but you said school wasn't always your favorite thing for academics.
So listen, one of the mistakes that our school system teaches you is that there is a single linear continuum of academic ability. To put it in the blunt way in which we inculcated it in school, you have bright kids and you have dunce kids. And so that is damaging in a number of ways, but it gives you a position on that spectrum that you think is inherent in your ability. I used to get punished in prep school regularly for not doing the homework properly. And when I went to high school, I finished near the bottom of my class. So clearly, on that one linear spectrum, I was not one of the bright kids. And it takes you a long time to overcome that by recognizing, which I now do, that intellectual ability and capacity is a matrix of a large number of abilities, of which the narrow academic ability to memorize and regurgitate is only one. It's not an unimportant one, but it is completely independent of insight and creativity and algorithmic ability and a multiplicity of other things. And I have so many examples in my life that that demonstrates this. I was in a class with one of my best friends, and she got A's while I struggled to get C's. And yet when we took subsequently a computer coding course, I mean, my A was easy and she struggled to put together a computer program. I have another example where a very good friend of mine, my contemporary, ended up in one of my classes at UWI and struggled to pass the course I was teaching on his third attempt. Well, this is somebody I play dominoes with regularly. And let me tell you, he beats the pants off of me at dominoes. So the point is, this idea that there is one spectrum that puts you on dunce or in the middle or bright, is something that we really need to get over.
All right, so I have a question about that. As someone who's seen different models of educational scoring, do you think that as an educator and as a parent, do you think it's beneficial to rank students?
Well, considering what it did to my psyche when I was ranked, near the bottom of the class, I would say no. But the greater problem is that schools don't make enough effort to bring out and value the other intellectual skills besides narrow academic ability. I mean, schools kill creativity. And so all of those who end up in creative careers, you have to rate them because they've had to overcome that to be able to stick to, that career path.
Agreed. Okay. All right, so you went through high school, you had fun, you played football, you did cricket, you did all the fun things, and...
I played football, I played cricket. I didn't play football well. Well, actually, I didn't play cricket that well either. But I certainly enjoyed it, and it was it was a happy time for me.
That's good. And your parents, was it always intended for you to go abroad, or what happened?
Oh no. So because my high school academic record was not stellar, it was difficult to get into UWI. And so I ended up going to school abroad in Canada, where I first had the idea.
Can we not gloss over that? Can we pause?
Sure.
So UWI did not want to take you.
UWI did not accept me as a student when I applied.
Okay, we'll come back to that. As
Okay.
a former lecturer at the University of the West Indies.
Okay.
All right, sorry, continue.
And I didn't have strong feelings about what I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do as a career. I like the creative side, and so my first thought was to go into advertising. And I got into a college in Canada that offered advertising. And after the first semester, where I got straight A's, one of the lecturers pulled me aside and said, "You don't belong here." He said that you need to go to, it was a community college, and he said, you need to go to a university so that you can maximize your academic and intellectual potential. And I took his advice. I applied to get into a university, and then I had to pick a major. And I did recall really enjoying economics in sixth form. And so I picked economics as my major, and I took to it, as they say, like Dr. Water.
What is economics?
Economics is how people, individuals and society have to make choices in the context of limited resources. And there's a sense in which all resources are limited. So when we say limited resources, we don't mean that there's a shortage. Time is limited, Money is limited, earning capacity, the amount of oil in the ground is limited. So it's how people and the societies in which they live end up having to make choices with limited resources. And once you define it that way, then you realize its application is much broader than what is traditionally designated as having to do with the economy. You know, it affects, you know, people's choices in terms of, you know, what they do with their hobbies. It influences whether you want to be in a legal career or get into crime. It influences how we spend our leisure time. So it really is much broader than having to do with just the economy. And that's one of the things I love about it.
Okay, all right. So you're studying economics in undergrad, and what else is happening at that point? How are you doing? Do you like it? You feel like it's your calling?
Yes. So I get to university, and because I didn't land at university with any intellectual confidence because of my experience at, you know, in prep school and high school, then I knew from then that I had to work twice as hard to be able to keep up with normal people. And it turns out that what I seem to lack in native academic ability, I made up for with discipline because I had that ability. So I came home literally from my first class, my first year at university, and I studied for 3 hours that evening and did so pretty much every single evening for the entire semester. And here's the interesting thing about academic life. That, you know, dunce child, bright child notion, which has currency at the lower levels of the academic ladder. The higher up you go on the academic ladder is the less important that is, and the more important discipline and application becomes. So I was able to pretty much come into my own because I did have discipline and I did have the ability to apply myself. And so, you know, made it through my undergraduate program just fine.
And then what happened? Did you decide for sure you wanted more school, love school?
Yeah, I kind of liked school. What I really liked was learning. I realized that as much as you feel this, you know, exhilaration when you walk out of your last exam for a semester, and there are a few feelings like that, by the end of the summer, and I'm going back to school, you know, it was not, you know, oh no boy, school again, you know, after that, do all of this studying. I started to get excited about the things I was going to learn. So I would look at the course outlines of my new courses and just can't wait to get into them because learning is exciting. You know, it's no different from, you know, when you're 8 years old and you're learning to ride a bicycle and you get excited about having an ability you didn't have before. And that's how I felt at the start of each semester. And so I wanted to continue learning. So when I finished my bachelor's degree, came back to Jamaica, signed up for a master's at UWI, same time, and did that part-time because I needed to start earning. And so I got a job at the Planning Institute of Jamaica and did my master's part-time.
You pretty much went to Canada, got your feet wet. How was that transition, like physically going from Kingston, St. Andrew to, what part of Canada was it?
I was in Toronto.
In Toronto. How was that?
Yeah. You know, going away to university is a transition for anybody because you're on your own for the first time. And it's actually a good idea to the extent that anybody's circumstances can manage it, that you move out of your home to go to university. And the same thing applies, you know, if you grow up in Westmoreland and you come to Mona campus in Kingston, because it allows you to transition to being wholly responsible for yourself and self-sufficient in terms of getting things done for yourself in a controlled environment. So you're not fully on your own. You know, you still have backup. Mm-hmm. You know, whoever is raising you, you know, can still save you. But you do get accustomed to being sick for the first time on your own and not having anybody, there to worry whether you live or die. So it's a good experience from that point of view. You get to play adult before you really are fully responsible. So university in Canada was a part of personal development that was useful.
All right, so you've been away, finished your undergrad degree, you're back. You're working and doing your master's.
Yes.
What was that like? Also in a government agency for your first time, right? First job in a government agency?
Yes. So I discovered then that many people, including myself, make the mistake of thinking you can go to school and work full time at the same time by adding up the waking hours of the day. And you say, well, you work for 8 hours in the day, you have 4 hours left in the evening, and so you can manage doing both things at the same time. But you don't realize that a limited resource is not really the number of waking hours. Limited resource is your intellectual energy. And by the time you're going to class at 5 o'clock, your concentration is spent, and you can barely concentrate, and then you have to go home after that and study and focus and concentrate. And so that's really the challenge. So it comes as no news to anybody who has tried this, that it's a difficult thing to do.
Okay, but you managed to do it. And how was the time at PIOJ? Do you remember any projects that you worked on? Is there anything that still remains today of that time?
Yes, we worked on a project to build a computer model of Jamaica, which I really enjoyed.
That's very broad. Tell me more.
Well, it is broad because a model of anything can be anything, and you can only model one specific thing. But the idea really was that, it is enjoyable for me to do anything that is logical or algorithmic, where you sort of put the pieces in place. I made a reference earlier to when, my colleague and friend, who was academically superior to me in most subjects, came into this computer course, which came easy to me and difficult for her. So the idea of working on building this computer model of Jamaica was really exciting, and I really did enjoy it.
Okay. And so at what point did you start teaching?
So while I was at Planning Institute, a job was advertised to be the economic and commercial officer at the US Embassy. I applied for the job. A little life lesson there, because I applied for the job even though I was not qualified based on what they advertised. It asked for a master's degree, which I did not yet have because I was still doing it part-time. It asked for 5 years working experience, which I did not yet have. But I applied for it anyway, and I got a job. And of course, that's a lesson for anybody that, aim for it, reach for it, reach for the high bar. But that job ended abruptly because at some point they sort of reviewed their security apparatus and determined that they didn't have enough information to have sort of full confidence that I should be working inside the US Embassy. And when that job ended in the middle of a summer, then I needed to find another job quickly. And since I was close to finishing my master's degree, then I called up a colleague in the Department of Economics at UWI and said, once I graduate, can I get something teaching there as an adjunct, as a part-time? And it turns out they had an opportunity, so I went there and started teaching and really enjoyed that first year of teaching.
That's awesome. Also, just curious, where was the US Embassy at that time?
It was located in that building, which was then the Mutual Life building, at the corner of Oxford Road and Old Hope Road.
Okay, cool. Well, okay. All right. So you're teaching, you enjoy it, and then you finish him.
And so because I enjoyed the year teaching, then I got the idea to just continue and do a PhD and become an academic. So
But not at UWE. That took you back somewhere else
well, UA did not offer PhDs in economics at the time.
at the time. Okay.
And so I applied to a couple of schools in the US, got into one of them, New York University. And so again, there's another lesson here. So I get accepted to NYU. I have no money to pay for this program. My parents have no money to pay for this program. Okay? Tuition fees in the US are expensive, and they're expensive for PhD programs. I had applied, and because of that, and I was looking around for ways to fund it. I applied for a number of scholarships, the main one of which was a scholarship offered by the Inter-American Foundation, a US agency, and I didn't get it. And so I had no funding, and I got on the plane anyway. My mother had a cousin living in New York, and I said to my mother, can you call my aunt and ask her if I can come catch for free, and she feed me breakfast and dinner for one term. And my aunt was happy to have me, so she said yes. Now the house wasn't even big enough because both of the rooms in their apartment were occupied. So basically, they moved the kid into their bedroom so that they could give me a room for the semester. And I took up the money I had, bought a plane ticket, went to New York, and the next morning I took the subway down to NYU, went up to the Department of Economics office, went to the person behind the receptionist desk and said, I'm Damien King, I'm here to take up the offer, and I have no money for tuition.
What did they say?
And the woman behind the desk did not guffaw out loud and ask me what the hell I was doing there then. So that was the first good sign. Mm-hmm. She said, okay, I'll tell you what to do. She said, go downstairs. When you exit the building, turn left, go to the building on the corner, and go upstairs to the second floor. That's the International Student Office. Ask them for a letter of deferment. And they are going to give you that letter that you can take to the bursary. And the bursary will accept it, and that will give you 2 weeks to find the tuition. Once the bursary stamps that, then you can register. And so I did. Registered, signed up for my courses, and I started going to classes. I had 2 weeks.
So what did you do? Did they have assistantships at that time?
At the end of the 2 weeks, I went back to the receptionist, who, by the way, was a Jamaican.
Oh.
Maisie.
Yeah.
To this day, I'm grateful to Maisie.
Okay.
I said, Maisie, tomorrow is 2 weeks. What now? She said, go back to the International Students Office and tell them you need a letter of extension. That will give you 2 more weeks. I made the trek, got 2 more weeks. Did that through the entire first semester. Completed my courses. I had 1 semester of PhD coursework under my belt. So the second semester now, there comes a problem. No university in the world allows you to register for a new term if you owe money. It doesn't matter what you owe the money for. It could be, $10 library fees for an overdue book. So I go back to Maisie. At which point, Maisie pulls off what we would call a little bandulu. A legal bandulu, I should point out.
Okay.
But it speaks to her creativity. One of the students at NYU had given tuition remission to, given a scholarship to, which would have covered the entire year, dropped out after the first semester. And she was able to take his tuition remission points for the second semester and apply it retroactively to clear off my debt for the first semester. So I didn't owe anything, and I could start the second semester by getting a letter of deferment. And I was on my way again. And then about halfway through that second semester, my family at home contacted me and said, there's a letter here for you from the Inter-American Foundation. Now, I did not reapply. So they opened it, and it said that they rolled over my application and I had funding. And so I was done. This is a lesson that I have learned and I have tried to pass on. That set a goal. It doesn't matter what the goal is. Whatever it is you want to do, wherever it is you want to go, set a goal. And then take the first step. My first step, my goal was I wanted a PhD. And the first step was to get on the plane. I got on the plane. And after I got on the plane, then I said, what's the next step? Next step is to show up at NYU and see what they have to say. So I think that'll get you far in life. And I'll tell you something. I've accomplished a lot that I did not believe I could accomplish by doing exactly that.